One of my favorite TV shows as a kid was Happy Days. You know, the one with Richie and Chachi and Joni and, of course, the Fonz. With the collar up on his black leather jacket, the slick-backed hair, and his confident air. When I was about 8 years old, Arthur Fonzarelli was about the coolest person I knew. Now, I don't exactly know how it happened, but at some point, perhaps around 10 years of age, I discovered that the Fonz was Jewish. The Fonz, none other than Henry Winkler, a Yid. Amazing. And with this discovery, there was a cascade. Something clicked, and I started looking around and finding Jews hidden in plain sight. I'm sensing I'm not the only one who's had this experience. When I became a Star Trek fan, I soon discovered that Captain Kirk and Spock, hardly believe it, both Jewish. Some of us remember a few decades back when this phenomenon of finding Jews hidden in plain sight was explored in a song written and performed in honor of the festival of Hanukkah by the one and only Adam Sandler. Among the Jews he called out for celebration were David Lee Roth, Kirk Douglas, Harrison Ford, and all three of the Stooges. Over the years, he updated the lyrics to include others like Friends stars David Schwimmer and Lisa Kudrow, comedians like Jerry Lewis and Ben Stiller and Jack Black, and actors and performers like Natalie Portman, Scarlett Johansson, Carrie Fisher, and Idina Menzel. And wait for it, Daniel Radcliffe. Yes, Harry Potter is Jewish. But not all the people Adam Sandler listed were famous performers, musicians, or sports stars. As far as I can see, there's only one who is none of those things. Among all those famous Jewish celebrities, Adam Sandler slipped in the name of someone who was just a little out of place. Born in New York in 1914, died in 1995, he was not a musician, nor an actor, nor a sports star, but rather a medical researcher, a virologist, in fact. In 1955, it was his miracle vaccine that started the process of eradicating the scourge of polio. His name, Jonas Edward Salk. And interestingly, Salk's polio vaccine was superseded just a few years later by another, even better one, this time developed by a man born in Białystok, Poland, who immigrated to the US as a young man and eventually served as president of the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. A man born with the name Abram Saperstein, but better known to the world through his Americanized name, Albert Sabin. Adam Sandler's song, listing famous Jews, taps into a special feeling we get when we find out that people we admire are part of our extended Jewish family. It's a form of intense pride that wells up at the accomplishments of our children and grandchildren. In Yiddish, that feeling is known as nachas. Nachas, that warm glow that we feel at the achievements of others with whom we feel kinship. When you Google the word nachas, as long as you exclude nachos from the search criteria, you discover, and I am quoting, the definition as follows: pride or gratification, especially at the achievements of one's children, congratulations. And the sentence, for example, is nachas to Miriam on her acceptance into rabbinical school. I have to check with Rabbi Phillips if her parents have a connection at Google. Now, nachas is on my mind right now because I think it's being forgotten a bit. Feeling or shepping nachas seems to be on the way out. I even have some data to prove it. An online website that tracks the usage of words through history shows that the use of the word nachas in English language books peaked in the first 2 decades of the 20th century before undergoing a slow decline until it picked up again in the 80s and 90s, and then another precipitous decline that continues to this day. Nachas on the decline? Nachas on the way out? Friends, I think it's time for a resurgence of nachas, a celebration of shepping nachas. And when better to consider the importance of shepping nachas than on this, our holiest of days, the day on which we reflect on our missteps and the ways in which we have fallen short. Because maybe, just maybe, by thinking about examples of people that elicit feelings of nachas, we ourselves will be inspired to reach to the heights of nachas making. Perhaps we will be inspired to be the sources of nachas, or in Yiddish, perhaps we will be nachas machers. And perhaps, rather more soberly, at a time in history when we see anti-Semitism again on the march, now is as good a time as any to remind ourselves of the positive impact members of our tribe have made and are making in the world at large. Today, I'd like to share just 4 examples of nachas machers, nachas makers, sources of familial pride. Of course, there are many more I could have included, and so I invite you to email me after Yom Kippur to tell me who you shep nachas from. Maybe it's family members. Maybe it's famous figures in the arts or entertainment, science or literature. Maybe it's an organization or a movement. But today, I'd like to share just 4 that stood out to me in this past year. The first is an individual. The other 3 is a group of individuals who coalesce together to form a nation state. First, I'd like to talk about nachas, a nachas macher, who is a Greek veterinarian born in 1961 to parents who were among the few surviving members of the centuries-old Jewish community of the Greek city of Salonika. Prior to World War II, 50,000 Jews lived there. They were a thriving Sephardic community whose ancestors had settled there after being expelled from Spain in 1492. By the end of the Shoah, of the 50,000 strong community, just 2,000 remained. And this Greek veterinarian is a child of this tiny remnant. In 2003, he joined a pharmaceutical company serving as technical director for the company's animal health division in Greece, before emigrating to the US in 2001, where he held high-level roles in various divisions of the company. By 2018, he was the COO, and in 2019, he became the CEO. And then COVID hit. And he directed his company to work with a smaller German company to develop a vaccine, which eventually received emergency use authorization by the US FDA in December of last year. Like Jonas Salk and Albert Sabine before him, we can shep nachas that at such a critical moment in world history, this Greek-Jewish veterinarian, son of Holocaust survivors, named Albert Bourla, headed up Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. It's hard to calculate the number of lives that Albert Bourla's Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has already saved in the US and around the world. This is nachas indeed. But Albert Bourla is just the first source of nachas I'd like to share today. One of the places his company did its early research and distribution is just a short flight across the Mediterranean from his hometown, Israel. Israel, the place where decades before, Albert Sabin lived and worked, heading up one of the world's leading research institutes. Israel, where in the age of COVID, chose to become a laboratory for tracking the effectiveness and safety of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Israel was one of the first countries to roll out this vaccine with extraordinary impact. And hardly a day goes by without news of insights emerging from the Jewish state, from the vaccine's early success and incredible safety record, to the challenges of the Delta variant, the need for an additional shot for the severely immunocompromised, and data about booster shots. Israel's centrality in the battle against COVID has been world-changing and life-saving. And that is nachas indeed. But that's only the second source of nachas I'd like to share today. While we're talking about Israel, I'd like to share two more reasons for us to shep nachas from the Jewish state, beyond its pivotal role in worldwide efforts to combat COVID. While COVID was raging, Israel also faced an unprecedented political crisis. Israel held 4 critical elections in less than 3 years. As Americans, it's hard to imagine what that must have been like. We deal with presidential election cycles every 4 years, midterms in between. We even suffer the occasional gubernatorial recall attempt. Israelis faced the equivalent of 4 presidential elections between late winter 2019 until the spring of this year. Intense and even dirty politicking took place. But in the end, the decision was made, as it should be, at the ballot box. And in the end, Israel proved that it remains one of the most resilient democracies, not just in the region, but in the whole world. There was no rioting at the Knesset. The incumbent stepped aside, begrudgingly assuming the role of loyal opposition, and the most unlikely and diverse coalition ever to govern the Jewish state was sworn in. And now there are members of Israel's government who are Orthodox and secular Jews, staunch free market economists and democratic socialists, men and women, straight and gay. There are members of the government from an Islamist Arab party. And believe it or not, there's even, for the very first time, a Reform rabbi, Gilad Kariv. While no one knows how long this government of strange political bedfellows will manage to hold, its very existence through a democratic process is something for which we can all shep nachas, especially in that neighborhood. Just look at the utter chaos in neighboring Lebanon, the violence in Syria, the friendly yet nevertheless authoritarian regimes in Jordan and Egypt. Democratic Israel with free elections, the rule of law and freedom of speech is a great source of pride. That is nachas indeed. Which brings me to one more important matter for which we can and should all shep nachas. In the Torah reading we just heard a few minutes ago, we were called upon to choose life. Bacharta b'chayim. Protecting life, saving life, sustaining life, choosing life. These are core principles of our Jewish tradition, and they lie at the foundation of the values of the Jewish state. This past May, when Hamas in Gaza again launched rockets into Israel, using its own civilians as shields, Israel took great pains to defend its own citizens, as any sovereign nation must, but also did its absolute best to minimize civilian casualties on the other side. War is awful, always, but defending one's people is the first and most important role of any government, as we well know, having just remembered 20 years since 9/11. It's hard to imagine what it is like for Israelis living in that part of the world, trying to balance self-defense with choosing life not only for their own people, but for the innocent people on the other side too. But choose life they do, as much as humanly possible, perhaps more than humanly possible. Yet I'm sure I'm not the only one who saw on my social media feed well-meaning but terribly misguided people who posted the most horrendous things about the state of Israel. It's tragic that just 72 years after the establishment of the first Jewish state in nearly 2,000 years, just 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, people still question Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state with security, with defensible borders, in a part of the world that is rife with violence, with corruption, religious zealotry, and petty despotism. Now, I rarely get angry, but the unfounded criticisms against Israel during the recent war in Gaza really got under my skin. Yet despite that anger, I shept nachas. I shept nachas for a country founded by Jews fleeing persecution who have managed to create a vibrant, democratic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation that punches well above its weight in areas from computing to agriculture, from renewable energy development to biotechnology, from TV and movie production to world-class cuisine. A nation that is a safe haven, not just for Jews anywhere, but a champion for the rights of LGBTQ people in a part of the world where they face unspeakable persecution. A nation that thankfully more and more Arab and Muslim states from the UAE and Bahrain to Sudan and Morocco are realizing it's in their best interests to partner with. A nation that takes the biblical mandate, Bacharta b'chayim, choose life, very seriously. That is nachas indeed. So friends, on this Yom Kippur, as we reflect on how we can and how we should do better, I'd like to suggest that we make the word nachas start trending again. In social media speak, perhaps we can get the hashtag trending, hashtag shep nachas. We shep nachas from members of the Jewish people who contributed to Bacharta b'chayim, choosing life, as did vaccine titans Jonas Salk, Albert Sabin, and Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla. We shep nachas from those who choose life, as does the State of Israel, by leading the world in COVID vaccine and treatment research. We ship nachas from those who choose life, as does the Jewish state, by maintaining a healthy and thriving democracy. We ship nachas from those who choose life, as the state of Israel does, by protecting innocent civilians on both sides, even and especially when it is hard. And of course, we can always ship nachas from those who enhance our lives by entertaining us. People like Adam Sandler, like William Shatner, and yes, even Arthur Fonzarelli. Amen.